The dog appeared on Harlan Voss's porch on the morning he had decided to stop trying. Not the morning he first thought about it. Not the morning he came closest. The morning he had finally made the decision with the calm, settled certainty of a man who had run out of reasons to feel otherwise. He had made coffee. He did not drink. He had sat in the chair by the window for 2 hours, watching the tree line at the edge of his property, the way a person watches a door they know will eventually open. He had not cried. Harlan Voss had not cried in 31 years, and he did not plan to start now. And then the dog was there. It was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, with its ears slightly raised, looking at him through the screen door with the kind of steady attention that most animals reserve for something moving in the grass. It was not a large dog, medium-sized, with a coat the color of river mud after rain, and a white mark on its chest, shaped like nothing in particular. It had no color. There was nothing about its appearance that should have made Harlan set down the glass he was holding, but he set it down. He went to the door. The dog did not flinch when the screen swung open, did not back away, did not do any of the submissive gestures a stray animal usually performs when a human it has never met comes too close. It simply watched him, and then it turned, and it walked toward the tree line at the western edge of Harlan's property, the side that backed up against the national forest, the side where an unmarked trail disappeared into the pines. It walked about 20 feet, and then stopped and looked back. Harlan stood on his porch for a long moment. The glass he had set down was still on the windowsill. E looked at Italiano. He looked at the dog. He went inside for his boots. He was not sure, later, why he did that. He would think about it many times. He was not a man who believed in signs. He had spent 32 years as a firefighter in Crestfield County, and the work had scrubbed most of his belief in the invisible world clean out of him. He had seen too many people pray in front of burning buildings, while the people inside did not come out. He had seen too many children carried out of too many houses, and no amount of faith had ever explained the math of who survived and who did not. He did not believe in signs. He believed in what he could see. What he could see was a dog waiting at the edge of the woods. He pulled on his boots. He did not change out of his flannel shirt. He did not bring water or a phone. He had no intention of going far. He just walked to where the dog was standing, thinking he would get close and it would run, thinking that would be the end of it, thinking he would come back to the porch and the glass, and the decision that had been waiting for him all morning like something patient and inevitable. The dog did not run. It turned and walked into the trees, and Harlan followed it, and the porch and the glass and the decision receded behind him through the pines. He had not walked that trail in 31 years. He knew it the moment he crossed the tree line and the smell of the forest changed around him, that particular combination of pine resin and wet earth, and something older underneath, something he had not smelled since the summer of 1993. His feet knew the path before his eyes did. The trail curved left past a granite outcropping, dropped slightly toward the creek bed that ran dry most of the year, rose again through a stand of older pines, whose root systems had buckled the ground into a series of low ridges. You had to step over if you weren't paying attention. He stepped over them without looking down. He had walked this trail before. He had walked it many times. Once, in a different life, the dog moved ahead of him at a consistent pace, never so far ahead that Harlan lost sight of it, never slowing to wait in any visible way, but always present around the next bend, always there when Harlan's eyes found the path again. It did not sniff at things. It did not veer off the trail. It moved with the purposeful, settled certainty of an animal that knows exactly where it is going, which meant Harlan should have been afraid. He was not afraid. That, too, he would think about later. He was 67 years old, following a dog he had never seen before into a forest and a trail he had avoided for 3 decades, and he felt something that was not peace, exactly, but that lived in the same neighborhood. A kind of suspension. The morning's decision did not disappear, but it moved further back, the way a sound fades when something closer takes over. The trail went deeper than he remembered, or perhaps he had simply forgotten how long it was. Harlan Voss had grown up in this county. He had grown up in the house where he still lived, the house his father had built with help from 3 neighbors and a borrowed truck. on a piece of land that backed up against a section of national forest that the county had never fully developed. He had inherited the house at 44 when his father died from emphysema, 3 years after Harlan's mother went from a stroke, so swift she had not had time to say goodbye to anyone. He had lived in it since then, the way certain people live in places they could leave but don't, not because the place is good to them, but because leaving would require a decision, and some decisions require a grief you are not yet ready to have. He had not married. This was the fact of his life that other people seemed to find most significant, the thing they referenced when they thought they were being subtle, the thing that landed in conversations at the retirement party and the occasional holiday dinners at his brother's house in the form of carefully indirect questions. He did not mind the questions. He just did not have an answer that fit inside the amount of time people were willing to listen. The true answer was not that he had never found anyone. The true answer was more complicated and lived further back in him, and had to do with a summer and a trail and a cabin and a word he had not said when saying it would have mattered. When Harlan was young, the trail through the western woods had been a regular part of his life. He and his younger brother Cade had used it for everything. For fishing at the creek before it went dry, for hiding when their father's mood turned dark in the particular way it turned in winter, sharp and unpredictable like a cold snap that comes without warning. For the long, slow walks of adolescence when the world felt too small and the trees made it bigger. Cade had moved to Oregon in his 20s and had a family there now. 3 children grown. A wife who sold real estate and called Harlan every Christmas. Harlan loved Cade in the uncomplicated way of brothers who do not need to be in the same room to feel the connection. He had not told Cade about this morning. He had not told Cade about the months that had led up to this morning, the slow, quiet contraction of everything that had once seemed like enough. He had been a firefighter for 32 years. This was the thing most people led with when they talked about him, the thing that organized their understanding of who Harlan Voss was. It was not inaccurate. The work had shaped him in ways he was still discovering, the way certain experiences work on a person from the inside out, changing the structure rather than the surface. He had been good at it. He had been better than good. He had risen to captain, which meant he had let other men into buildings that were actively trying to kill them, and he had brought them out again, and in 32 years he had lost one. A young man named Porter, 24 years old, who had gone through a floor that should not have given way when it gave way. And Harlan had heard it happen, and he had gotten there, and it had been too late, and he had never fully recovered from the specific geometry of that moment, the way he had been 7 steps away, and each step had taken too long. He did not blame himself for Porter. He had reached a kind of peace with it over the years that was not forgiveness exactly, but was something functional, something that allowed him to sleep and to work and to live in the house his father had built without waking up in the dark, with his hands shaking. But he had never become the kind of person who did not think about it. You cannot carry a thing that heavy for that long without it becoming part of your frame. And then, for a few specific years, he had used the trail for something else. He had used it to walk to a small cabin half a mile into the forest, a hunting cabin that technically belonged to a retired teacher named Orrin Fitch, and had been built decades earlier by Orrin's own father and had not been used for hunting in a long time. Harlan had known about the cabin since childhood. He had not known, until the summer of his 25th year, that Orrin Fitch's daughter had moved in to use it as a studio. Her name was Mirabelle. He had not said her name out loud in 31 years. Ace did na quietly, to the pines, just to see how it felt in his mouth. It felt like pressing on a bruise, but the bruise was his. He had made it himself a long time ago, by not doing a particular thing at a particular moment, and he had carried it ever since with the same quiet, stubborn competence he applied to everything else. The way you learn to favor one shoulder without ever acknowledging you are doing it. Mirabelle Fitch had been a painter, not the kind of painter who paints pictures to hang on walls, or rather, not only that kind. She was the kind of painter who needed to understand why she was painting before she could begin, which meant she spent enormous amounts of time not painting at all, just sitting with her subject until she felt she understood something true about it. She had a patience that Harlan, who had lived his entire life in a constant state of readiness for something to go wrong, found almost physically incomprehensible. She could sit still for an hour and come out of it, knowing something she had not known before. He did not know how to do that. He was not sure he had ever sat still for an hour in his life. She had been 23 when she moved into the cabin and 26 when she left, and in the 3 years between, she had produced 40 paintings that Harlan had watched take shape from nothing, from white canvas and the smell of linseed oil and her particular silence, into things he could not name but could feel the truth of. He did not know much about art. He knew what happened when you looked at something and it looked back. He had loved her for 3 years. He had loved her quietly, without announcement, the way certain things grow in places where there is not quite enough light, slowly and sideways, and with a kind of stubborn insistence that has nothing to do with whether conditions are favorable. He had not told her. He had spent 3 years walking this trail to her cabin, sitting with her while she worked, sharing meals she cooked on a two-burner camp stove that she had brought in on the bed of her pickup truck, along with 6 boxers of supplies and a portable radio she kept, tuned to a public station that played classical music on weekday evenings. He had sat with her through those evenings, through the cellos and the failing light, and the smell of turpentine, and the particular pleasure of being in the company of someone who did not require you to perform, and he had not told her. He had almost told her once. It was October of 1992, and he had come to the cabin later than usual after a long shift, arriving just after dark with mud on his boots from the unpaved section of the trail, and she had been sitting outside in the dark, on the top porch step, with a glass of wine, and the look she got when she had been thinking hard about something for a long time. She had said, without looking up, that she had been thinking about leaving. Not the cabin. The county. Possibly the state. She had been offered a residency at a school in Scotland, and she was thinking about taking it. She had said it the way she said most things, with the same quiet attention she gave to her paintings, like she was turning the idea over in her hands to see all its sides. She had asked him what he thought. He had told her he thought it sounded like a good opportunity. He had meant to say something else. He had stood there in the dark outside her cabin with the words somewhere in his chest, words that were specific and true and that he had never said to anyone, and they had not moved. He had said it sounded like a good opportunity, and she had nodded slowly and poured him a glass of wine, and they had sat in silence for a while, looking out at the darkness between the pines, and he had understood that the silence was a kind of answer, too, and that he had given it by not giving the other one. He had taken off his scarf that night because the air was warmer than expected. He had left it on the porch railing. He had noticed it was gone the next time he came, assumed the wind had taken it, and had never thought about it again. She left the following spring. He did not say goodbye properly. He had been called to a fire the morning she was loading her truck, a house fire on the east side of the county that turned out to be minor, contained within an hour, and when he came back to her cabin it was empty and the key was under the mat, the way she had always left it when she went to town for supplies. He had stood in the empty cabin for a long time. He had not touched anything. He had not taken anything. He had left, and he had never come back. And he had spent the 31 years since becoming a man who was extremely good at not going back to things. The dog stopped. It stopped so suddenly that Harlan nearly walked into it, catching himself with a hand against a pine trunk, his heart jumping in the way of a man who has been walking in memory and has returned abruptly to his body. He steadied himself. He looked up. The cabin was there. He had known, somewhere in the part of his mind that monitors things without permission, that this was where the trail led. He had known since the granite outcropping, possibly since the moment he crossed the tree line. He had known, and he had kept walking, and he had let the memories carry him here. And now he was standing 40 feet from the door of a cabin he had not entered in over 3 decades. And the dog was sitting at the foot of the porch steps, looking at him with its quiet, insistent attention. And the morning light was coming through the pines at an angle that made the whole scene look like something painted by someone who understood how light worked. The cabin was not empty. Smoke was coming from the chimney. Thin, pale smoke. The smoke of a fire that has been burning for a while and is working through good dry wood. The door was closed, but not visibly locked. There was a pair of rubber boots beside the steps, caked with dark earth. There was a clay pot on the window ledge that held a plant of some kind, and the window behind it was lit with amber light from inside. Someone was living here. Harlan stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment. The dog had not moved. It was still sitting at the foot of the steps, looking back at him with the patient, unblinking quality of an animal that has delivered what it came to deliver and is now waiting for the human to catch up. He walked to the door. Knocked. There was a sound of movement inside, and then the door opened, and a young woman stood in the frame. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a little older, with dark hair pulled back loosely and paint on her forearms, and a look of moderate surprise that shifted, as she took him into something more complicated. She looked at the dog at her feet, and then at Harlan, and then at the dog again. Her name was Odalis. She told him that immediately, before he could speak, as if she wanted to establish the basic facts before anything complicated could begin. Odalis Fitch. Her grandmother had owned this land. Her grandmother had died 3 months ago and left it to her, and she had come here from Portland because she needed a place to work, and the cabin had been standing empty for years, and she thought she would try it for a season. And the dog had showed up 2 weeks ago. She had not kept it. Exactly. It came and went. She had named it Cove because of the white mark on its chest that she thought looked vaguely like a cove or an inlet on a map. It had never gone anywhere in particular that she had noticed. She glanced at it again with the look of someone reconsidering something they thought they understood. Her grandmother, she said carefully, had left some things in the cabin. Books, mostly, a few paintings, and some other things, in a wooden box under the bed that Odalis had not yet gone through. She had been putting it off. She was not sure why. Something about opening a box of a dead person's private things felt like a threshold she was not ready to cross. She paused. She looked at Harlan with the kind of direct attention that reminded him, without warning and with considerable force, of someone he had not thought about in 31 years. She said, "Your name is Harlan Voss, isn't it?" He said yes. She said, "My grandmother talked about you." The inside of the cabin was almost exactly as Harlan remembered it, and that was the part that hit him first. Before anything else, that steady impact of a space that has remained itself while you became someone entirely different. The two-burner camp stove was gone, replaced by a small wood stove in the corner. The table was different, but the shape of the room was the same, and the quality of the light through the western window was the same, and there was still a faint smell of linseed oil and mineral spirits that no amount of time seemed to have fully cleared. Odalis made tea. She moved through the small space with a quiet efficiency, and she did not ask him the obvious questions, which he appreciated because he was not sure he could have answered them. She put 2 mugs on the table and sat down across from him and looked at him with the steady, unrushed attention of someone who has decided to let a thing unfold at its own speed. She told him what she knew. Her grandmother Mirabelle had returned from Scotland after 18 months, not because the residency had gone badly. It had gone well. She had come back because she could not stop thinking about something she had left unfinished, which at the time Odalis had assumed was a painting or a series of paintings. Only later did she understand it was something else. Mirabelle had come back to the cabin. She had painted there for several more years. She had been happy, Odalis thought, in the particular way of people who have made a peace with something difficult. She had married once, in her 40s, a quiet man named Ferris who repaired clocks and never asked too many questions, and they had lived a pleasant, unspectacular life in the town 20 miles south. And Ferris had died of a heart attack at 63, and Mirabelle had come back to the cabin after that, and stayed. She had never, in Odalis's memory, spoken of any great regret. She had been a woman of considerable reserves. She had not been given to sentiment in the visible ways. But she had kept a box under the bed. Odalis brought it out. It was a simple wooden box, pine, with a small latch that was not locked. She set it on the table between them and looked at it, and then at Harlan. And the look on her face was the look of someone who has been carrying a weight they did not fully understand. Harlan opened the box. Inside, folded into thirds with the careful precision of someone who folded something many times before settling on how it should be done, was a letter. There were other things in the box. A small glass bottle with dried wildflowers in it, the flowers long since bleached to pale straw. A folded paper that turned out, when he smoothed it, to be a hand-drawn map of this section of the forest, marked with trails and water sources in a hand he recognized. A photograph he did not look at directly, slid it past with his thumb. Not ready. And the letter. His name on the outside. Not his full name. Just Arlen. Written in a hand he recognized without understanding how. The way the body recognizes things the conscious mind has filed away. His hands were not entirely steady as he unfolded it. The letter was dated September 1993. 4 months after she had left, he read it slowly. In the quiet of the cabin, with the wood stove ticking behind him, and Odalise sitting very still across the table, and the dog asleep on the floor beside the door. And he read it the way you read something that is rearranging the floor beneath you as you go. She had written, "I have been sitting here for 3 days, trying to decide whether to send this, and I have decided I am going to write it regardless of whether I send it, because there are things I need to say out loud even if no one hears them." She had written, "I think you already know what I am going to say. I think you knew the night I told you about Scotland, and I think the reason you said it sounded like a good opportunity was that you were afraid of what would happen if you said what you were actually thinking. And I think I let you say it because I was afraid of the same thing." She had written, "I have never been good at saying certain things directly. I have always tried to paint them instead. But there is no painting for this, so I am going to use words. I was in love with you. I was in love with you for a long time, and I did not tell you, and I left, and I think about the night. I told you about Scotland almost every day, and I think about what you didn't say and what I didn't say, and I have come to understand that we were both very, very afraid of something very, very simple." She had written, "I am not writing this to ask you to do anything. I don't know what I am writing it to do except to say that it was real. What happened in those 3 years, in those conversations, in all those evenings. It was real, and I knew it was real, and I think you knew it was real, and I want you to know that I know." She had written, "I also want you to know that I never blamed you. Not for what you didn't say. Not for not being there when I left. I heard about the fire. I know you were working. I know you, Harlan. I know the kind of man you are. You would have been there if you could." She had written, "I don't know if I will send this. I think probably I won't. I think I will fold it up and put it somewhere and let it be what it is, which is the truth of something that happened, which sometimes is enough." She had written at the very bottom, in a hand that was slightly different from the rest, as if it had been added later. "Possibly much later, possibly years later, I kept the blue scarf you left here that October. I don't know why I kept it. I just couldn't leave it." Harlan put the letter down on the table. He did not move for a long time. The wood stove ticked. The dog shifted on the floor. Outside the western window the light had moved again, lower now, and the shadows of the pines were longer across the clearing than they had been when he arrived. She had known his name the whole time. She had known exactly what he had not said that night, had named it, had held it in a box under a bed in a cabin in the forest for 31 years. And she had not been angry. She had not been waiting for an apology or an explanation. She had been doing something harder and quieter than either of those things. She had been keeping record. She had been saying tease was real, and real things deserve to be witnessed, even if only by the person who writes them down and puts them in a box and never sends them. He had spent 31 years believing she had left and forgotten. He had made that belief into a kind of foundation, had built his solitude on top of it, had told himself that what had happened in those years had been small to her, pleasantly small, a chapter that she had closed cleanly when she drove her truck out of the county. That belief had allowed him to carry the weight of his own silence without fully breaking under it, because if it had not mattered to her, then it had not mattered, and if it had not mattered, then he had not lost anything of consequence by not speaking. The letter took that foundation apart in a single page. She had known. She had felt it. It had been real in the same way it had been real for him, with the same weight and the same texture, and she had left anyway, and he had stayed anyway. And they had both been carrying the same unsaid thing in separate directions for 3 decades without knowing the other was carrying it too. He had needed to know that. He had not known he needed to know that until he knew it, and now the knowing was spreading through him in the way warmth spreads after cold, slowly and from the inside out. Reaching parts of him that had been contracted for so long he had forgotten what it felt like when they were not. He left the cabin 2 hours later, with the letter folded in his chest pocket, because Adilis had said it was his to keep. She said her grandmother had kept it in that box for 31 years and had never addressed it to anyone else, and that seemed like intent. Harlan had folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, and they had shaken hands on the porch. And then Audley's had looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated attention she had inherited from somewhere, and she had said, "Come back sometime if you want. I'll be here until September at least." He said he would. The dog walked him back through the pines, not the same way it had let him out, with that purposeful, ahead-of-you determination. This time it walked beside him, close enough that its shoulder occasionally brushed his knee. At the pace of a dog that has finished what it came to do and is now simply accompanying someone home. Harlan walked slowly. The afternoon light was different from the morning light in these trees, thicker, more amber, slanting through the pines at angles that caught the dust and made the forest look lit from within. He thought about Mirabelle, not the Mirabelle he had loved, or not only her, the Mirabelle who had written that letter and then not sent it. The Mirabelle who had come back from Scotland and gone on living and painted and married a man who repaired clocks and had not, apparently, been defined by the things she had lost. He'd always assumed, when he allowed himself to assume anything, that she had left and forgotten. That the 3 years they had spent in this forest had been a small thing to her, a backdrop, a chapter that closed cleanly. The letter did not say that. The letter said it had been real. The letter said she had known it was real. He had needed to know that. He had not known he needed to know that until he knew it. And now the knowing was spreading through him in the way warmth spreads after cold. Slowly and from the inside out. He thought about the scarf. But escarpes, the one Mirabelle had kept and the one he had kept, and neither of them knowing they were keeping two halves of the same thing. He had left a scarf. He had forgotten about it for years. A blue wool scarf, one of a pair his mother had knitted before she died, that he had taken off that October evening because the night was warmer than expected. He had left it draped over the porch railing. He had noticed it was gone the next time he came, assumed the wind had taken it, and had not thought about it again. Not consciously, but somewhere in him, in the part that keeps track of things without asking permission, he had kept the other one, the matching scarf, the other half of his mother's pair. It was in a box in his closet at home. A box he opened sometimes and then closed, feeling something he could not name, and not trying to. He had never connected it to Mirabelle. He had never allowed himself to connect it to anything. Audley's was watching him. She had the same capacity for stillness her grandmother had apparently had. She was not pressing him for anything. She was simply there, in the way that certain people are simply there, without agenda, without the social anxiety that most people feel when silence extends past its comfortable limit. The silence in this cabin did not feel uncomfortable. It felt like the silence of a place that has held things quietly for a long time and knows how. He asked if he could read the letter again. She said of course. He read it again, and then he sat with it in his hands for a long time without reading it, just holding it, the way you hold something you cannot yet put down and are not yet sure you deserve to keep. The fire in the wood stove had settled into a low, steady burn. The dog had not moved. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. He asked Odalys if she had known, if Mirabelle had ever told her. Odalys was quiet for a moment. Tense aside, she told me she had loved someone once, that he was a good man who did not know how to say the thing that needed to be said, and that she had not known how either, and that they had both stood at the edge of something and looked at it and stepped back. She said she did not regret it in the way that regret usually feels. She said it had been one of the things that made her understand how much courage an ordinary moment can require. She paused. She looked at the table. She said, "She talked about you more in the last 2 years. Toward the end, she said she hoped you were well." Harlan looked at the window. The light had shifted since he came in. More than an hour had passed. Maybe 2. He had been sitting in this cabin for over an hour with a letter that had been written 31 years ago by a woman who had been dead for 3 months, and he was not entirely sure who he was anymore. That was not a bad thing. He had come into the woods that morning with a certainty that felt like granite, a settled, cold, final certainty about what the day would hold. That certainty was gone, not replaced by something bright or reassuring, just gone, replaced by something he did not have a word for. Something more like confusion, but kinder. Something more like being lost, but in a landscape that turned out to be worth exploring. He asked about the dog. Odlise said again that it came and went, that it had appeared 2 weeks ago out of the forest, with no collar and no evident owner, and she had fed it once, and it had stayed, that it did not seem lost in the way strays usually seem lost, did not have the searching, unfixed quality of an animal looking for something. It seemed, if anything, to have a settled sense of purpose that she could not account for. She had not looked for its owner. She was not sure why. It had simply not seemed like the right thing to do. Harlan looked at the dog. The dog opened one eye, regarded him with the calm specificity of an animal that has completed a task, and closed it again. He said quietly, "I think it came for me." Odlise was quiet for a moment. Tensei sighed. "I think that's probably right." He came out of the trees at the edge of his property and stopped. His house was in front of him. The porch was in front of him. The glass was still on the windowsill where he had left it, catching the afternoon light. And he stood there looking at it for a long time. And the dog sat beside him, and also looked at it. And the moment had a quality that Harlan had no frame for. That was neither grief nor relief, but something that contained both, and was larger than either. Went inside. He poured the glass down the sink. He went to the closet in the spare bedroom where he kept boxes of things he had never found a reason to throw away. He opened the third box from the bottom, the one he opened sometimes and then closed. And there was the blue wool scarf his mother had knitted, the color of a winter sky an hour before dark, the color of the space between things. Took it out. He held it in both hands. He thought she kept the other one. He put the scarf on the table in the kitchen, not in the box, just on the table where he would see it. He made coffee and he drank it. He sat at the kitchen table with the scarf in front of him, and the letter in his pocket, and the afternoon light coming through the window, and he was 67 years old and a retired firefighter and a man who had spent most of his life being extremely competent at tasks that kept him from sitting still. And he was sitting still, and the world had not ended. He thought about Odlise, her ease in that cabin, the paint on her forearms, the way she moved through the small space without self, the way she had made tea and set it on the table and waited, the way she had said, "Come back sometimes if you want," without any of the performance of invitation, as if she simply meant it. He thought about the letter and about what it had said about not blaming him. He had been braced, some part of him, for blame. He had been carrying a version of blame himself for 31 years. A low-grade account of all the things he had not said, and all the mornings he had not gone back, and all the ways he had let something real pass through his hands without holding it. The letter did not offer absolution, exactly, but it offered something better, which was witness. Someone who had been there saying, "I know what happened. I know what it was. It was real, and you were not wrong to feel it. And you were not wrong to have been afraid." The afternoon turned toward evening. Harlan sat at his kitchen table for a long time. The light changed. The dog, which had followed him inside, slept in a square of sunlight near the back door. He thought about tomorrow. Then he thought about the day after that. Then he thought about September, and about a cabin half a mile into the pines, and about a young woman with paint on her forearms who had her grandmother's eyes. He was not certain what any of it meant. He was not certain there was meaning in the sense he used to want meaning. "The clean," explained Harris Wykind, but he had walked into the woods that morning intending one thing, and he had come back intending something different, and the difference was not small. He opened the letter one more time. He read the last line again. About the scarf? About not knowing why she kept it, about how sometimes you hold on to something without understanding the reason, and the holding is itself enough of an answer. He folded it carefully and set it on the table beside the scarf. He sat there in the quiet kitchen, in the falling light, and the dog breathed on the floor. And outside the pines were dark against a sky going orange and purple at the edges. And somewhere in those trees was a cabin with a light in the window. And somewhere in that light was a woman he had not met this morning and might not have met at all. And between him and the letter and the scarf in the cabin there was a thread he could not see, the full length of, but could feel the tension of, could feel It's the way you feel the weight of something on the other end of a line in dark water, present and real and patient. The scarf is still on the table. He has not put it back in the box.